Okay, guys, what we're going to talk about today is standard deviation and how we can calculate it using our calculator. So what standard deviation is, it's how spread out the data is from the central mean value. So yesterday we talked about the measures of central tendency. So that was the mean, the median, and the mode. So just as a quick recap, the mean is like your class average. So you add up all the data values and then you divide by how many data values you had. The median is the middle data value, and the mode is the most occurring data value. Okay, we also know about two measures of dispersion. So the range is you take your highest data value minus your lowest data value. And then outliers are any data that look different. So for example, on a class marks of a test, if most kids got between, let's say, 65 and 85, but there was one kid that got a 32, the 32 would be the outlier. Okay. Okay. So another type of measure of dispersion is called standard deviation. So this gives a value as to how spread out the data values are in relation to the mean. So remember, the mean is the class average. So what this number gives us, it tells us how, let's say the class average on a test was 65%. If the standard deviation is really a big number, then that tells us that most kids got a number that was quite far away from the class average of 65%. Versus a low standard deviation would tell us that most kids got right around 65%. Okay. A low standard deviation means that most of the data values are closely clustered around the mean. A high standard deviation means that most of the data values are scattered farther from the mean. This is the symbol we use for standard deviation. It's called sigma. So it's like the letter O with an extra stick on the top. Okay, so if each of these blue dots represents a data value, so the mean, remember, is the class average. So all of these data values right here, they're all quite closely clustered around the average. So this would consider to have a small standard deviation. Whereas here, see how much more spread out your data values are. Okay, so they have the same class average, but the actual marks are very different. Okay, so this data set shows a low standard deviation because the values are all clustered around the mean. And this data shows a high standard deviation because the values are more spread out around the mean. Okay, so mean and standard deviation are the two most common measures used when looking at data values. So for example, one common application area is in sports. So when a coach picks players for his team, he wants to pick players who are consistent scorers and players who are not consistent scorers, but when they're on, they are absolutely amazing. So the players who are consistent scorers, they have a low standard deviation and a pretty good mean. Okay, so they have a pretty good points per game average, and they're very consistent with getting that. So they might not be your big scorers on team. Let's say they score 10 points per game, and that you can pretty much bank they're going to score between 8 and 12 points per game. So they average about 10 points per game, and they're pretty consistent in that. Okay, whereas players who are not consistent scorers, so these players might have a higher possible mean, or they could have a lower possible average, but they have a very high standard deviation, meaning when they're on, they're amazing, and when they're off, they're absolutely horrible. So when you create a team, you're looking for really consistent players with a few outlier players, because if those outlier players are having a great season, they could do amazing things for your team. If they're having a bad season, they will do horrible things for your team. Okay, so it's a mixture of those two ideas. So for example here, both of these teams have the same mean height. So what that means then is that if I were to take the height of each of these players in centimeters, Okay, so if I were to take, so all of these players, let's say, are 200 centimeters tall. I have no idea what it is in centimeters. The average, okay, so the mean is 200 centimeters. Okay, okay, so you can see from the first team that they're all the same height. So that would mean then that they would have the same mean. Because they're all the same height, they're very consistent in their height. So because they're consistent, their standard deviation will be very low because they all are the same height. Now the second team, they're all over the place. You've got somebody really tall, really short. So again, I have no idea what the mean would be. However, I know that the standard deviation will be high because they are not consistent in their heights. They don't all have the same height. Okay? Okay, so how do we find standard deviation? Well, the actual manual way to do it is like a 7-step process, and I'm not going to go through that with you. I'm going to show you how to do this using your calculator. So the steps are right here. So this is what we're going to do. Okay, so we're going to enter these exam marks into our calculator, and the calculator will tell us the mean and the standard deviation. So the mean on the calculator is shown as an X with a bar over the top, and the standard deviation is shown as a sigma with an X beside it. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to enter these data values. So the way we do that, okay, so on your calculator, because we're in statistics, you hit the stat button, and then we're going to pick number 1 for edit. Now, right here you have an L1 in the first column. These data values have to go into the L1 list. They have to. So I'm going to go, and it doesn't matter what order you do them in. So 80, 75, 64. So you go 80, enter, 75, 64, and then you have 65, 55, 88. So 65, 55, 88. And then we have 90, 75, 54. So 90, 75, 54. Okay, so there are all of our test scores. So that's putting the data into L1. That's our first step. Second step is we're going to go back and hit the stat button again. And we're going to hit the over arrow to go to calc. And then you select number 1. Okay, go down to the word calculate, hit enter, and here's all the answers. So I'm just going to drag this over here so you can see. So this number right here, the top one, that is our mean. Okay, and this one right here, that is the standard deviation. Okay, now what you do want to make sure of, this one right here, n equals 9, this is the number of data values. So I entered in 9 test scores, and this is 9. You also want to make sure that that number matches, because then you'll know for sure if you happen to miss any data values that you were supposed to enter. Don't worry about any of this other stuff. It doesn't mean anything. Okay? Okay. So Nazra and Deco are laying patio stones. Their supervisor records how many stones they lay each hour. Okay, so we have the hours across the top, and there's how many paving stones each one lands. So the questions are, which worker lays more stones during the day, and which worker is more consistent? Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we have to clear out that information that was in our lists. Okay, so we have to go ahead and erase the lists. So what I want you to do is I want you to go second plus sign, and see right here number 4. Number 4 says clear all lists. So just select that and hit enter. So it will clear out anything that you put into list 1. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to hit stat. I'm going to pick number 1, and I'm going to enter this information into list 1. Now we have to do each person separately. That is the only problem with this. So 34, 41, and 40. So 34, 41, 40. And then we have 38, 38, and 45. So 38, 38, 45. Okay, so then I go stat, I go over to calc, I pick number 1, I go down to calculate, and I hit enter. So his average is 39.3 and his standard deviation is 3.3. Okay, so his average is 39.3 and his standard deviation is 3.3. So in other words, he lays an average of 39 paving stones every hour. And because 3.3 is a fairly low number, I would say he's fairly consistent. Okay, so now let's look at the other person. So we've got 51, 28, 36. So what I'm going to do here, so when I go to stat and I pick number 1, I'm just going to type these ones right over. So I'm going to go 51, 28, 36, 44, 41, 46. 44, 41, 46. Okay? I could have cleared the list out, but if it's a short list, it's just as easy to type right over it. So now I'm going to go stat, calc, number 1, go down to calculate, hit enter. So 41 and 7.4. So 41 and 7.4. So the second employee, Deco, he averages 41 stones per hour, but he has a higher standard deviation. So which worker lays more stones during the day? On average, I would say Deco. He's doing 41 stones per hour. Which worker is more consistent? That is Nazra, because he has the lower standard deviation. Okay, so that's how we use those numbers. Okay, what happens when we have frequency? Okay, so we've talked about frequency graphs. Now we need to talk about frequency when we calculate standard deviation. So it says the frequency table shows the number of hits per game by a baseball player during the course of 1 month. Calculate the mean and standard deviation. So in 5 games, 1 month, he had no hits. In 10 games, he had 1 hit. In 4 games, he had 2 hits. 3 games, he had 3 hits. And in 1 game, he had 4 hits. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use list 1 and list 2. So this is how this is going to work. So first thing I want you to do is I want you to clear your lists. So we're going to go second plus sign, pick number 4, and hit enter. Okay, so that's now done. So now go to stat, pick number 1, and under list 1, we're going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And under list 2, we're going to put the frequencies. Now, the frequency will always go into list 2, every single time. So if you're not sure what should go into list 1, list 2, always put the frequency in list 2. Okay? So 5, 10, 4, 3, 1. So 5, 10, 4, 3, 1. Now, what your calculator now reads, the calculator reads this as 5 zeros, 10 ones, 4 twos, 3 threes, and 1 4. So what you could have done, you could have just used list 1 and gone 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 4. So you could have done everything in list 1. This is a faster way. Okay, so by using list 2, it allows us to get through this information quicker. So now we're going to hit stat. We still go over to calc, and you still pick number 1. You always pick number 1. But here's the difference. So the list is still in L1, but now you also have a frequency list. So that's in L2. So if you look right above the number 2 on your keypad, you will see a small L2 written in blue. So go second, number 2, and there is your L2. Go down to calculate, hit enter. And there's the information. Okay? So what is his average? Whoops, where did that go? Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, so his average, so he averages 1.35 hits per game. That's the average. And standard deviation is 1.09. Okay, so he's actually not very consistent. If his average is 1.35 and he's standard deviating by 1 hit and his average is only 1.3, this is not a very consistent player. Okay, so essentially the frequency stuff is done the exact same way as the non-frequency stuff. You just have to remember to put that L2 in. Okay, that's the only difference. Okay, so the assignment will be attached. If you have any questions on this, do not be afraid to ask, and we'll see you in the next video.